Lads, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sheff United way. The Sheffield United accounts from 2019-20 have been published. It was the first time we posted a profit in a decade. And to give us a breakdown, we welcome accountant and Sheffield United fan, currently living in Spain, Darren Smith.
Hi, chaps. Thank you for your invite. It's good to be on.
No problem. Really excited for this one. There's going to be a lot of things coming out in this that I think a lot of Sheffield United fans that are watching this may not know about. So, really excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the accounts have been out for a couple of weeks or so, but I know that they've been touched on at a high level, but there's probably bits and bobs. I know people were asking me on Twitter about what does this mean, what does that mean, so hopefully we can answer a few questions to people.
Yeah, I think as well, someone like me who doesn't delve into that kind of the detail, I think somebody just being able to put this video on and listen to it will probably help them out quite a big deal. So yeah, shall we start off with talking about the stadium and the assets? So how much did they cost?
Right. I mean, obviously that was the big news, I suppose, in those accounts, because the dispute between Kevin and the Prince came to a head with the requirement that Kevin sold the assets to the Prince. And what actually happened was they didn't sell them to him personally, they sold them back to the club. So the club has basically brought all the assets back into the club. So that's the stadium, the academy, the gym, the hotel and the offices. And the amount disclosed in the accounts was that they agreed a fee of £38 million for that, which I think was probably lower than we were expecting.
It's quite an interesting one, isn't it, Darren? Because you've probably seen this as well. Online, the Prince had to buy the ground, as you mentioned, as part of the High Court ruling. That's been known for a while. But I have seen people online that seem surprised and even angry by this. But it was covered quite extensively. It's not like that cash could have been spent on a new player. And I'd imagine it actually puts us in quite a good position.
Yeah, I mean, while we didn't own the stadium, we were always a little bit exposed to future owners and what they might want to do. But obviously, we were paying rent as well for all the facilities. So it's a bit like you buying your house. You want your house owned by you, even if you have to pay for it on a mortgage. It's preferable to rent it. I think the disappointing element to it was that they couldn't quite agree on all aspects of the ground. So there are some plots of land that Kevin still owns and he probably will develop independently. I think there was quite extensive talks to try and get those into the club as well, but they just couldn't agree a commercial value on those and they weren't actually covered by the court decision. So you might find a bit of development behind the Cop and on the corner of John Street, on the corner of South Stand to the Cop, where you might see a few things that changed, and that has actually impacted on our plans for the COP. We were actually looking to try and develop the COP, and that's been delayed a little bit.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of people commenting on the Sheffield 2 4SU forum about exactly that, and some saying that if Kevin McCabe is as big a blade as he is, this is not my opinion, that he would actually want to help us with our COP redevelopment. But obviously, we will wait and see. What time
it's difficult, isn't it? He's a property developer, and you can't. Yeah. And obviously, I think it's well publicised. He didn't really get full value for his shares in the club for various reasons. So I don't think you can blame him for trying to push for a better deal on the property if he can.
How much did His Royal Highness Prince Abdullah actually put in of his own money?
Well, in that particular year. It's actually clear in the accounts he put in £21 million. So, and I think that surprises people because, as you said in your introduction, we actually did make a profit last year. But what people have got to be careful about is we make a profit and it's on our day-to-day expenses. The stadium doesn't come into that, so that's an expense over and above the expenses that are in the profit and loss account, and also the player transfers. The costs of those are spread over their contracts. So typically, if we buy Ollie McBurney for £20 million, and he's on a 4-year contract, we'll have only reflected £5 million of that in the profit and loss. So despite all the Sky TV money, the Prince did have to actually put some of his own money in during that season.
You just touched on the playing budget. How much was it exactly?
Well, this again is often talked about as to whether we can afford to pay Premier League salaries, and I think a lot of people forget that we've actually come such a long way in such a short time. That the players that we had were the core of the side in the Premier League, and they were getting substantial pay rises, but a lot of them started off at League One level. So in terms of the accounts, they're actually the salary bill was £78 million, which on the face of it, probably I think we were probably the lowest payers in the Premier League, but it's only half the story. The actual playing budget, which was laid out to the squad and everything, was 125 million, and it's up to the manager and the transfer team, Mitch and co, to determine whether they want to spend that on higher salaries or whether they want to spend that on fees. So the board will set the budget, and a team like Fulham this season have paid a lot less out in fees, but are paying substantial salaries because they're paying for loan players and they're paying for foreign players on low transfer fees. And we went another way. We broke our club record transfer fee 3 or 4 times. So if you actually look at the overall budget, 125 million, that probably placed us around about 15th or 16th in the league, which is not too bad really after 12 years away.
Yeah, absolutely. This is more of a statement, not a question. And you've kind of already answered one of the questions I know Nick was going to cover about spreading the cost of transfers. You can go into more detail on that if you wish. But it is worth noting, as you mentioned there, that the wages were the lowest in the league, £11 million less than Norwich, a 54% wages to turnover ratio. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, fans just want people to spend. Realistically, a football club should be spending about 60 to 65% of its revenue on salaries and be competitive. You've got to bear in mind that a lot of the salaries will have been determined at the start of that season. And I don't think anyone in their wildest dreams thought that we would finish 9th. So our actual revenue was probably higher than we were budgeting and forecasting for with the merit payments. So we probably were aiming for around about 60% of our revenue on salaries. But bear in mind, a lot of these players actually then got this was actually the 1920 season. Since then, obviously the big name players like Egan, Bash, Baldock, Didsey, Sharp, Norwood, they all got pay rises in the summer. So it wasn't a case of we were not signing players. It was that those players were on modest salaries for Premier League clubs. And we corrected that once we stayed in the division.
So Darren, this is a question that's come up quite a bit, and I know you've had to field this on Twitter, but do we fund the club on loans?
No, definitely not. I mean, there's been a lot of talk that we never pay for transfer fees up front and it's all on borrowed money and everything. Every single Premier League team doesn't pay transfer fees up front. But a lot of the negotiation with clubs is not about the headline transfer fee. It's about how the fee is spread over 2, 3, 4 years. Now, if you actually look, we actually ended up paying quite a lot of our transfer fees up front, and probably more than we would normally expect to. And I think it was the way that we got deals like McBurney and Mousset over the line, is that we actually were prepared to pay a big chunk of those fees up front. So if you actually look, we spent, in terms of transfers, we actually spent £49 million in that particular year. We deferred 17 million. So we virtually paid 3/4 of the fees all up front in the first season, and we would have hoped to have spread them more over the 2 to 3 years. We then paid there was another £11 million that was contingent on the performance of the players. Now, again, obviously, you might say, well, this did not perform this season, but a lot of that contingency in the first season will have been about us staying up. So there's a high likelihood that most of that £11 million will have actually been spent subsequently as well. So out of a spend of probably 70 million in that year. We virtually paid 50 million of it up front, and we'll have met the rest of it probably by now. It's definitely not done on borrowed money. I think there are some concerns. Certainly in the year, there was a bit of publicity about loans that we took out with Macquarie Bank. Now, again, this is quite normal. The Sky TV money tends to come in 3 chunks in the summer, January, and end of the season when we know our league position. We spend that money on transfers in the 2 windows. So a lot of clubs borrow the money knowing that it's come in at the end of the season. So if you actually look, we cleared that loan by the end of the season, which is what you would want. We paid about 800, I think it was £875,000 in interest on loans. That actually was about, I think it was the 6th lowest in the Premier League in terms of interest paid. So it shows that most of the clubs are actually meeting their daily working capital on loans much more significant than ours.
That all makes so much sense, really. And I think most fans that kind of don't know the ins and outs of these loans probably would just think, oh, we're borrowing here, we're borrowing there. So it's nice to hear that from you. So without Prince Abdullah's support, how would we compare to these other clubs in the Premier League?
Well, I mean, the difficulty is we actually, this is how much we've come on in such a short time. The revenue last year was 143 million, but 117 million of that was TV money. That's how big a factor TV money is. And to put that in perspective, we were actually, in terms of revenue, we were actually the 28th biggest football club in the world. A couple of spaces, a couple of million ahead of clubs like AC Milan, and probably earning about the same amount of money as Ajax. Now, if you put that in perspective, when we were in League One about 3 seasons earlier, we were probably looking at something like 10 or 11 million profit, 10 or 11 million revenue. So that's a heck of a long way in 2 to 3 years. But if you actually look at our natural order of things and take the TV money out and just look at how much we pay as fans and how much our corporates pay and how much we get in sponsorship, we were actually bottom 3. I think there was only Burnley and Bournemouth that actually raised less money than us.
It's quite incredible. And you're right about the rise. It just makes you realise, the more you mention it, how far we've come and how much did we lose due to COVID-19?
Well, obviously COVID affected that season because I think we played the last 4 league games and the cup game behind closed doors. But the bigger impact of it will obviously be in the current season. I don't think anyone expected us to be closed doors all season. But in that particular season, they itemised it in the accounts. They reckon it was about £11 million. There was £8.7 million rebate given back to the TV broadcasters because I suppose their product wasn't as good without the fans. I think we lost about £2.5 million in matchday income, and then we had obviously some additional costs that related to COVID and overheads to do with that. But I have to say, in terms of COVID, we probably lost less money than anyone else in the Premier League because our matchday income is probably substantially lower than a lot of the Premier League.
So how much did the directors pay themselves?
The directors pay themselves nothing. And to put that into perspective, say a club like Watford, their chief executive would be paid about 750 grand. A team like Bournemouth, who ended up getting relegated, they paid themselves £1.3 million to the directors. So obviously, I think that the Prince and his family have taken on board the fact that we were early days in the Premier League, and it's not really the time to start taking money out. It's still a case of putting money in and trying to establish ourselves at the top level.
It's been reported that our shirt sponsor, our current shirt sponsor, is actually going or has gone bust or is not in a great financial position. How much will we lose from that?
Well, that's Union Standard Group, and yeah, unfortunately, they've got tied up in some problems in Australia, and it looks like they're going to be wound up. The deal for them was they were going to pay us £3.5 million per season, and I think we actually did receive the money for the second year as well as the first year. So we're going into next season needing a new shirt sponsor. I think this is an area where they're hoping that the United World position will help, because we're looking for a global sponsor that might want exposure to Belgium, France, Middle East, and India. Because actually, in terms of the shirt sponsorship, we were bottom three in terms of how much we got from our shirt sponsor compared to the rest of the Premier League.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, it seems like a lot of money for us, because, you know, if the Sheffield United Way were to sponsor them, we could probably offer 350 quid, and we will offer that if it looks like we get to August and the Blades don't have any sponsor, but they'll probably be all right.
Well, if you look at the shirt behind you,
I know.
there's two of the shirts with Blades, because we couldn't actually find a sponsor that year.
That's exactly what made me think of it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, again, I think the thing was, actually, if we'd have not signed a 2-year deal, after the success and the amount of television coverage we had in the first year, we probably could have doubled that shirt sponsorship for the second year. But hindsight's a wonderful thing. You just don't know that. And unfortunately, we're now coming out of a contract where we could have probably tied somebody in on Premier League money now that we're going to be in the Championship. So we've probably not done it as well as we could have done. But and it's hard to criticise when no one expected us to do so well.
Well, if people are watching and considering shirt sponsorship, I only drink Dessun apple juice or whatever they did. Obviously, I've got Westfield health insurance. I drive a VW, and I'm a Blade. And I can't think of any. Oh no, and I banked with Capital One. There we go. It definitely works, is what I'm saying.
So obviously, the team aren't doing too well this season. We're very, very close to relegation. So how much money are we going to lose realistically by getting relegated to the Championship?
Well, I mean, we're delving into the next year's accounts, the year that we're currently in, aren't we, when we do this? I mean, in terms of the TV money, there was about 20 million of the TV money that was based on us finishing ninth. Sorry, there was a lot of the money was based on us finishing ninth. We're going to lose about 20 million for finishing 20th. So even in this season, we're probably going to wipe out the profit that we actually made last year. The players' salaries I know are going to be much higher in the current accounts than last year's accounts, because there were quite substantial increases given to our key players. But then obviously the big shock will come with relegation. By having a second season in the Premier League, we've at least secured ourselves 3 years of parachute payments, whereas Norwich only secured themselves 2. But the TV money will go down from 117 million to 42 million. So obviously it's a big chunk, 70 million drop from last season to next season.
Yeah, so of course it all comes down to it, doesn't it? What division you're in and whether you can sustain it and maintain it. Are we in significant debt after buying the stadium?
Well, interestingly, when we actually bought the stadium, it was right at the end of the accounts that we're talking about. So actually, the main reason the Prince put money in was to actually cover that purchase. I think the idea was that if we stayed in the Premier League for 2 years, we would actually pay off the building in total. I think there has been a restructuring of finance. I think there's been a Macquarie loan has been taken out through to next January, and we have taken out a mortgage, but unfortunately we'll all have to wait until the next accounts to see what that term has been. But I think there has been a restructuring with a view to covering the losses, because obviously, like we talked about before, there'll be the COVID losses and obviously the impending relegation losses.
Is there any kind of ideas in improving the facilities in the training ground?
Well, in the year that we were talking about, we actually spent about £11 million on improvements to various things. Now, a lot of that was actually on the main stadium because of we had to introduce VAR, unfortunately. We had to upgrade the floodlights. There was various press and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's not an inconsequential amount, 11 million. There was a plan that we were building a new academy off-site, and work did start on that, but then it did stop. I don't know whether that was because we overspent in the summer on transfers or whether the start was bad, and we were concerned. So there is an element of academy improvements that have been started, but I think there is going to be an announcement on that. To be fair, I don't think the intention is to continue that, but whether we actually continue it on the same site that we're on now is something that we're looking at.
Yeah, of course, all these financial facts, independently audited, they are out there. And when the season 2021's financial accounts are released, Darren, what do you expect to see that will be headline grabbing? I'd imagine wages will be far higher. Yeah, transfer fees as well.
I mean, look, I think we have to be realistic about it. I mean, we are going to report a loss next year. Like I say, the salaries are going to be higher, the revenue is going to be lower. We've not had any match day income at all. We've had no corporate sponsorship. But I think with COVID around, you just have to put it in perspective. I don't think our losses are anywhere near as much as other Premiership clubs, and it's certainly going to be nowhere near the sort of level that other Championship clubs are in. So I think actually, if you take where we'll be starting next season, we should, in theory, have a top 2 or 3 budget. Whereas obviously when we were promoted last time from League One, we were bottom 6, and then we went to sort of mid-table in terms of budget. We should start next season as a top 2 or 3 paying club, and I don't think we'll be going into that with anywhere near as much debt as any of the other Championship teams. So that I think you'll find a lot of players were under contract last summer, and there wasn't a lot of movement, and there's going to be a lot of players that come out of contract, and there's not going to be the demand on fees below the absolute elite level.
What do you know about agent fees?
The agent, I mean, that's funny. In terms of agents' fees, we actually paid. I think we paid about £7 million last year. Wow. Over the calendar year.
That's
which
enormous.
Which actually was quite low given the amount of money we spent on transfer spend.
I should have been an agent.
Yeah. Is there still time?
There's still time.
Yeah. I actually do the accounts for 2 or 3 agents, and it's I have to say the job is getting harder now, but it is very lucrative work. Agents are earning money not just on transfers of players, but they're on renewal of contracts, on we actually pay agents in order to get rid of players as much as we do to buy them. So they just become part of the fabric, unfortunately.
What do agents exactly do to deserve that sort of money then?
They put an X% in everyone's contract, basically, is the long and the short of it, and then look after footballers that struggle to actually put one foot in front of the other once they get away from a football pitch. I don't know if I know it's a bit off record, but I don't know if you saw Kevin De Bruyne negotiate a new contract with Manchester City and had no agents involved whatsoever.
Wow!
He's actually secured himself the highest paid player in the Premier League, and he used a data analytics company to do it instead.
I love that. As a fan of Michael Lewis's writing, I can tell you that is a great idea. Using any kind of analytics, or as they call it in America, sabermetrics, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I can't imagine many of us doing that, to be honest.
I would go along with that.
I mean, I want Leeds Mousset's agent, but beyond that, I'm not sure what the standard is. One thing that no one has mentioned, but I think it is interesting. Again, it's not been in the account, but I think it reflects well on the club. If you actually look, we spent £3.4 million on donations in the year. Charitable donations to kids' charities and hospitals and stuff like that. And in a COVID year, I think that should be highlighted a lot more. I've not seen the Star or Yorkshire Live or anyone like that actually put that in. I found that very disappointing, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, and you're right, it hasn't been reported by the media. So in one word, Darren, was that more or less than Sheffield Wednesday donated to the great causes, the great charitable causes? Was that more or less?
To be honest with you, I don't really have any news on that other club that you're talking about, so I can honestly say I've never looked at their account.
Probably a good idea.
Definitely.
Yeah, keep it that way. Darren Smith, you have been a fountain of knowledge. You have retained so much. I can't quite fathom how you keep it all in there. You've been incredibly good with your time. Thank you so much for sharing the information as we have looked back on those accounts for the 1920 season for Sheffield United. You're more than welcome on the Sheffield United way anytime.
No, thank you for having me. It's just unfortunate. It seems like an eternity ago, doesn't it? July 2020 compared to where we're at now.
Oh, it was.
I'm sure times
wonderful.
will get better.
Yeah, I'm sure they will because they have to. It was one of the best seasons of my entire life, and it's rolled straight into the worst season of my entire life. And I know people have had a go at me and have cited other seasons that were worse. Well, there actually statistically weren't any seasons that were worse. This will be our lowest points total ever. But the reason this is the worst for me, and I'll just reiterate this again, is because football for me is going to Bramall Lane with my dad. That is what it is. And the results and stuff, it almost doesn't even matter as much. And I haven't been able to do that.
I agree 100% with that, Al.
Thank you. Darren Smith, an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darren.
Cheers.